Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to speak to the soul, the part of you that was bruised, not just by what was done to you, but by who you trusted to never do it. Betrayal cuts the deepest when it comes from someone who once claimed to love you. And what makes it even more complex is when the betrayal comes from a narcissist, a master of illusion, who deceives not only others, but themselves. But what if I told you behind that smug smile, behind that silence after they wronged you, behind their indifference is pain? A pain they cannot name, a suffering they will never admit, a brokenness they work tirelessly to hide. Today, let's peel back the curtain, not to understand them for sympathy, but to understand them for wisdom. Narcissists are often misunderstood, not just by others, but by themselves. On the surface, they may appear supremely confident, self-assured, and untouchable. They walk into rooms with what seems like certainty, speak with conviction, and often attract admiration. But what most people fail to see is that this outward display is not confidence, it is compensation. Underneath the mask of superiority lies a foundation built on insecurity, self-doubt, and an overwhelming fear of inadequacy. When a narcissist betrays someone, it's easy to assume they do it from a place of power. But power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it postures. And in the case of the narcissist, it poses. The betrayal isn't born from abundance. It's born from a deficit of true identity, a deficit of emotional intelligence, a deficit of connection to their own humanity. At the core of every narcissist is a fractured self-image. Somewhere in their early formation, whether through trauma, neglect, excessive praise without boundaries, or emotional abandonment, they learned a devastating lesson. I must be more than who I am to be loved. This belief becomes the breeding ground for a persona. And from that point on, the narcissist begins constructing a version of themselves that is acceptable to the world, one brick at a time, with attention, validation, performance, and manipulation as the mortar. They become addicted to being perceived as something more intelligent, more desirable, more successful, more in control. But here's the irony. They don't believe they are these things. They believe they must appear to be them in order to be accepted. That is why they need people, not to connect, not to share, but to validate. People become tools, not companions. Mirrors, not hearts. This is why narcissists are deeply threatened by authenticity, yours and theirs. Your vulnerability unsettles them. Your honesty confronts their mask. Your emotional openness reminds them of what they buried to survive. And so, to avoid being exposed, they choose manipulation over intimacy and betrayal over accountability. But make no mistake, beneath that manipulation is not joy. It is fear. Deep, consistent, gnawing fear. Fear of being discovered. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of not being enough. And when that fear grows too loud, they resort to control. Control through gaslighting. Control through deception. Control through betrayal. Betrayal to a narcissist is not just an act, it's a strategy. It is a way to reassert dominance in a world where they feel emotionally powerless. If they sense they are losing influence over you, betrayal becomes their weapon of choice. It's their final move to remind themselves, I'm still in charge. But what they don't realize is that in using that weapon, they wound themselves. Because even though they may suppress it, they are not immune to consequence. In the quiet moments, when the noise dies down and the audience fades, they are left with themselves. And that's the most frightening reality for a narcissist, facing the emptiness behind the persona. They don't truly know who they are without the applause, without the admiration, without someone to manipulate. And when they betray someone who genuinely loved them, someone who saw them beyond the act, they lose more than just control. They lose the rarest thing they ever had. Someone who was willing to see their truth and still offer love. That's where the pain begins. Not immediately. It may take days, weeks, even years. But eventually the void catches up. The mask gets heavy. The applause stops. And the betrayal, which once felt like a victory, starts to feel like a vacuum. Because no matter how many new people they bring into their lives, no matter how many images they curate, they are haunted by the reality that they sabotaged the very thing they desperately craved: connection. Understanding this doesn't excuse their actions, but it does reveal a vital truth. Narcissists are not gods. They are wounded people pretending not to bleed. Their betrayal is not a reflection of your worth. It's a mirror of their own emptiness. They operate from brokenness disguised as bravado. And when you recognize that, you stop internalizing their behavior and start seeing it for what it is, a desperate attempt to matter without ever having to be vulnerable. And so, while they betrayed you to feel powerful, they actually betrayed themselves. Because in trying to prove they didn't need you, they proved they couldn't keep someone who genuinely saw them. And that realization, when it comes, isn't loud. It's silent, but it's shattering. Betrayal is never accidental when it comes from a narcissist. It is deliberate. It is calculated. And most importantly, it is strategic. You see, when a narcissist betrays someone, it isn't always because they've stopped valuing the relationships. It's often because they're trying to maintain control of the narrative. In their mind, loyalty is currency, but only if they are the ones spending it. When they feel that their mask is slipping or that your presence is beginning to expose their insecurity, they strike first. They betray to reclaim the upper hand. But don't confuse this move with strength. It's not strength, it's fear wearing armor. A narcissist fears exposure of their inadequacy, exposure of their emotional dependency, exposure of their need for validation. And when they sense that someone is seeing them too clearly, loving them too deeply, or expecting authenticity they cannot deliver, their internal alarm goes off. Suddenly, the one they once pursued becomes a threat because genuine love demands truth, and they are not built on truth. They are built on image. So, betrayal becomes a way to escape accountability. It's not just about hurting you, it's about escaping the version of themselves they can't sustain. When they lie, cheat, manipulate, or disappear, it's a desperate attempt to stay in control of how you see them. Because deep down, they fear you discovering that the person you loved never really existed. They would rather burn the bridge than let you walk across it and see what's on the other side. And here's what's even more twisted. Narcissists often provoke chaos intentionally. They manufacture drama. They start arguments over things that never mattered before. They accuse you of things you never did. Why? Because if they can get you to react emotionally, they can paint you as the unstable one. Then, when they betray you, ghost you, or discard you, they can justify it. They can say, see, that's why I had to leave. That's why I had to find someone else. It's manipulation at its most insidious level. But the real danger lies in what betrayal does to the person being betrayed. Especially when you've loved the narcissist deeply. When you've invested time, energy, loyalty, and patience. When you've believed in their potential more than they ever believed in themselves. Their betrayal doesn't just break your heart, it shakes your sense of reality. You start questioning yourself. Did I miss the signs? Was it my fault? Did I imagine the love we shared? But no, you didn't imagine it. You just loved someone who never learned how to receive love without needing to control it. Narcissists fear vulnerability because vulnerability means giving someone else the power to hurt them. And since they've never healed from the original wounds in their own past, be it rejection, neglect, or deep-rooted shame, they betray before they can be betrayed. They think, if I hurt you first, you won't get the chance to hurt me later. It's a defense mechanism masked as cruelty. Their betrayal is not an expression of your inadequacy. It is an expression of their dysfunction. When someone uses deception as a method to feel powerful, that's not a partner, it's a manipulator. When someone turns intimacy into a transaction, that's not love, it's emotional warfare. And when someone chooses betrayal over communication, they are not trying to solve a problem. They are trying to avoid accountability. It's important to understand this, not to excuse them, but to free yourself from internalizing their actions. You didn't fail them. You didn't make them betray you. You didn't love them wrong. You simply loved someone incapable of being honest with themselves, so they couldn't be honest with you. Their betrayal is a loud declaration of how little they value healing and how much they fear exposure. But your response doesn't have to match their brokenness. You can walk away. You can rise. You can heal without revenge. And in doing so, you take back the very power they tried to control with that betrayal. Because the truth is this: they didn't leave because you were too much. They betrayed you because you were getting too close. And control for them will always matter more than connection. That is the price they pay. And sadly, it's the lesson they never learn. When a narcissist betrays someone, there is often a moment, sometimes brief, sometimes prolonged, where they appear to feel powerful. In that moment, they may carry themselves as though they have won. Their silence can seem calculated. Their distance can seem cold. Their ability to move on quickly can make it appear as if they have escaped all consequence. To the person left behind, it can feel as though the one who caused the pain is somehow walking away untouched. But what looks like triumph on the outside is often one of the greatest illusions they ever create. The narcissist often interprets betrayal as proof of control. In their mind, if they can wound someone and still remain emotionally detached, then they believe they have the upper hand. If they can deceive someone and avoid accountability, they convince themselves they are smarter. If they can discard a person who genuinely loved them, they may see that as evidence that they are the one with the power. They do not always celebrate because they are happy. They celebrate because they believe they have protected themselves from vulnerability. To them, the ability to hurt someone before being hurt feels like victory. That is why immediately after betrayal, many narcissists appear unusually calm. They may seem relieved. They may seem energized. Some even appear happier than before. They may quickly attach themselves to new people, post carefully crafted images of success, or behave as though your absence means nothing. But this is rarely genuine peace. It is often emotional adrenaline. It is the temporary high that comes from believing they have regained control of the story. For a while, that illusion can feel convincing even to them. They may believe they have escaped the emotional weight of what they did. They may believe they can simply replace what was lost. They may believe that because they do not immediately feel pain, no pain is coming. But emotional truth does not disappear simply because it is ignored. It waits, it lingers, and eventually the illusion begins to crack. The problem with false triumph is that it cannot sustain itself. A victory built on deception has no foundation. A sense of power built on hurting others cannot remain stable because it depends entirely on external reinforcement. The narcissist's feeling of success usually lasts only as long as they can avoid reflection. It survives only as long as they can distract themselves. It remains intact only as long as they can convince themselves that they were justified. But life has a way of confronting people with themselves. At some point, the applause fades. The new attention loses its excitement. The new people do not provide the same supply. The distractions become weaker. And in those quiet moments, they are left with something they spend their lives trying to escape themselves. That is when the fragile nature of their victory begins to reveal itself. Because what they thought was strength was often avoidance. What they thought was freedom was often emptiness. What they thought was triumph was often simply delay. Many narcissists do not suffer immediately because their ego protects them from the full impact of their actions. Their mind creates narratives that shield them from guilt. They tell themselves you deserved it. They tell themselves you were the problem. They tell themselves anyone would have done the same. These internal stories allow them to maintain the illusion of innocence. But deep within them, unresolved truth does not disappear. It settles into the places they cannot easily silence. And the more genuine the connection they betrayed, the more fragile their illusion becomes. Because deep down, they know the difference between superficial admiration and authentic love. They may chase admiration from many people, but real love is rare. And when they betray someone who truly saw them, supported them, and cared for them, there is often a part of them that knows they destroyed something valuable. They may never say it aloud. They may never admit it openly, but the awareness exists beneath the surface. That is why their apparent victory is often short-lived. What appears to be confidence can slowly become restlessness. What appears to be indifference can slowly become obsession. What appears to be peace can slowly become internal agitation. They may begin checking on you indirectly. They may become disturbed by your healing. They may feel anger when they see you becoming stronger without them, because your recovery becomes evidence that their control was never as complete as they believed. Nothing unsettles a narcissist more than realizing the person they tried to break has become whole again. Your healing exposes the weakness behind their performance. Your peace reveals the instability behind their control. Your growth challenges the fantasy that they were the one who won. Because real triumph does not come from who walked away first. It does not come from who caused the deepest wound. It does not come from who appeared strongest in the immediate aftermath. Real triumph belongs to the one who chooses truth over illusion, healing over bitterness, and growth over manipulation. And that is why what looked like their victory was never truly victory at all. It was only a fragile illusion that could not survive the weight of reality. One of the deepest contradictions within a narcissistic person is this. They fear abandonment more than almost anything else, yet their own behavior often creates the very separation they dread. This is what makes their internal world so conflicted. They desperately want connection, but they do not know how to maintain it in a healthy way. They long to feel chosen, valued, and emotionally secure, yet they continuously destroy the trust that genuine connection requires. The same hands that reach for closeness are often the same hands that push it away. At the center of this fear is a profound emptiness. Narcissistic individuals often build their lives around external validation because they lack an inner sense of stability. They need other people to reflect back an image that makes them feel important. Relationships become less about love and more about emotional supply. They seek admiration instead of intimacy, control instead of vulnerability, and dependency instead of mutual respect. The tragedy is that while they may appear self-sufficient on the outside, internally they are often terrified of being emotionally left alone. Abandonment to them does not simply feel like loss. It feels like exposure. It feels like proof that they are not who they pretend to be. When someone finally walks away from them, it threatens the identity they have spent years constructing. The departure of another person forces them to confront something they work hard to avoid. The possibility that the problem was never everyone else. The possibility that their own choices, manipulation, and emotional cruelty created the distance. For someone who survives by protecting a fragile ego, that realization can feel unbearable. That is why many narcissists sabotage relationships before the other person has the chance to leave. They may become cold, critical, dismissive, or emotionally unavailable. They may create unnecessary conflict, shift blame, or betray trust. To others, it can seem irrational. Why destroy someone who genuinely cared? Why wound someone who stayed loyal? But from their perspective, creating the ending themselves feels safer than risking an ending they cannot control. If they can cause the disconnection, they can still tell themselves they were the one in power. Control becomes their substitute for security. Instead of building trust, they manage people. Instead of nurturing love, they manipulate emotions. Instead of expressing fear, they hide behind pride. They would rather be feared than forgotten because fear still gives them significance. In their minds, even negative emotional reactions can feel better than emotional indifference. If someone still cries over them, talks about them, or struggles because of them, they still feel they matter. What they cannot tolerate is becoming irrelevant. But the consequence of disconnection eventually arrives. It comes when the person they underestimated finally stops explaining, stops chasing, stops pleading, and simply walks away. There is a particular pain narcissists feel when someone they believed would always remain finally chooses peace over chaos. It is not always obvious on the surface. They may pretend they do not care. They may move quickly into another relationship. They may act as though your absence means nothing. But beneath the performance is often a quiet disturbance they cannot easily escape. Because losing someone who truly saw them can create a kind of emotional unrest they cannot easily replace. It is one thing to lose admiration from strangers. It is another to lose the presence of someone who once loved them despite their flaws. Your absence becomes a silence they cannot control. Your detachment becomes evidence that their influence has limits. And for someone who believed they could always return, always manipulate, always regain control, that realization can be deeply unsettling. What makes this even more painful is that many narcissists cannot honestly grieve the loss. Healthy people can mourn what they have damaged. They can admit regret, learn from it, and change. Narcissists often struggle to do that because accountability threatens their identity. Instead of processing the loss, they may bury it under anger. They may rewrite history. They may convince themselves you were the problem. But denial does not erase pain. It only traps it deeper. And that is the hidden consequence of disconnection. They become imprisoned by the very walls they built to protect themselves. Their fear of abandonment leads them to create abandonment. Their fear of rejection leads them to behave in ways that invite rejection. Their fear of being alone pushes them into patterns that leave them emotionally isolated. The very thing they run from is often the destination of their own choices. For you, understanding this can be freeing. Their inability to keep genuine connection was never proof that you are not enough. It was evidence that they could not sustain the kind of love they secretly needed most. Sometimes the greatest consequence they face is not public failure or visible loss. Sometimes it is living with the silent knowledge that the love they feared losing was the love they destroyed with their own hands. The most difficult pain to recognize is often the pain no one else can see. When people think about a narcissist after betrayal, they usually imagine someone who walks away untouched. They picture a person who smiles quickly, replaces people easily, and appears to continue life as if nothing meaningful was ever lost. To the outside world, the narcissist can seem unaffected, almost immune to emotional consequence. But some of the deepest suffering is not the kind that cries in public. It is the kind that hides behind composure. It is the kind that lives in silence. And after betrayal, many narcissists carry a pain that is not loud, but is very real. The narcissist rarely experiences pain in the way emotionally healthy people do. Most people feel sorrow, acknowledge it, and eventually process it. But the narcissist often cannot allow themselves that honesty. Their identity is built on appearing powerful, superior, and untouchable. To admit pain would mean admitting vulnerability, and vulnerability feels like weakness to them. So instead of confronting what they feel, they bury it. They suppress it. They disguise it. They turn their suffering into anger, distraction, blame, or emotional numbness. What others cannot see is that underneath that cold exterior, something is happening internally that they cannot easily escape. After betrayal, a strange conflict begins inside them. On one hand, they may convince themselves they did the right thing. They may repeat stories in their own mind that justify their actions. They may tell themselves you deserved it. They may create reasons why their betrayal was necessary. This is how they protect the image they have of themselves. But beneath those mental defenses, another truth quietly waits. Somewhere beneath the excuses, they know what they did. Somewhere beneath the denial, they understand what they destroyed. And even if they never say it aloud, that awareness can become its own form of torment. The pain often begins when the emotional supply is gone. While you were in their life, you provided something they deeply depended on, even if they never appreciated it. You gave attention, emotional energy, patience, and often a kind of love they could not generate within themselves. Even when they mistreated you, part of them relied on your presence. When betrayal finally drives you away, they may initially feel powerful. They may believe they have won, but eventually the emptiness returns. And this time it feels heavier because your absence exposes what your presence used to cover. That is when the silence becomes uncomfortable. In quiet moments, when there is no audience to impress and no one to manipulate, they can begin to feel the weight of what remains. It may not appear as obvious grief. It can show up as restlessness, irritation, insomnia, anxiety, or an unexplained heaviness they cannot name. Because narcissists often lack deep emotional self-awareness. They may not even fully understand why they feel disturbed. They only know something inside them is unsettled. The betrayal that once felt empowering now becomes a private reminder of another connection they could not sustain. What makes this pain even more profound is that it is often invisible to everyone around them. People may still see charm. They may still see confidence. They may still see someone who looks like they have moved on effortlessly. But external appearances can be deceiving. Many narcissists become experts at performing wellness while internally struggling with the consequences of their own actions. They may smile in public and suffer in private. They may appear victorious while inwardly wrestling with loss they cannot admit. Their pain does not always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like increased control. Sometimes it looks like greater cruelty. Sometimes it looks like emotional detachment. Sometimes the pain becomes the very thing that hardens them further. And perhaps one of the deepest parts of that silent pain comes when they see that you are healing. Your recovery becomes evidence that their control was never absolute. Your peace becomes proof that they did not destroy you. Your growth becomes a living reminder that despite everything they did, you survived. That realization can cut deeply because it confronts the illusion they built around themselves. They may not openly mourn losing you, but they often struggle with losing the version of themselves that felt powerful through your pain. This does not mean every narcissist transforms because of that pain. Some never do. Some spend their lives running from it. Some bury it under new relationships, new distractions, and new masks. But pain ignored does not disappear. It simply changes form. It settles into the hidden places of the heart and shapes a person from within. And for many narcissists, the deepest suffering is not what others did to them. It is the quiet suffering created by what they did to those who genuinely loved them. One of the most painful truths to accept after surviving a narcissist is this: your healing will disturb them more than your suffering ever did. While you were broken, confused, and emotionally bleeding, they felt powerful. Your pain confirmed the illusion they depended on. It reassured them that they still had influence over your emotions, your thoughts, and your sense of identity. As long as you remained wounded, they could believe they were still significant in your life. But the moment you begin to heal, everything changes. Your healing becomes a language they cannot control. A narcissist can often tolerate your anger. They can tolerate your tears. They can even tolerate your confrontation because all of those reactions still center them. Every emotional response can be interpreted as evidence that they still matter. But what they cannot tolerate is your peace. They cannot tolerate your silence when it no longer carries pain. They cannot tolerate seeing you smile without them being the reason. They cannot tolerate watching you rebuild a life that no longer requires their presence to feel complete, because your growth becomes a mirror. And mirrors are dangerous to people who have spent their entire lives avoiding themselves. When you rise from the damage they caused, you unknowingly force them to face something they have spent years running from. You become living proof that what they called weakness was actually strength. You become evidence that what they tried to destroy in you was the very thing they never had within themselves. Your ability to heal exposes their inability to change. Your restoration reveals their emptiness. Your wholeness quietly uncovers their fragmentation. That is why sometimes they become more agitated after you move on than they ever were during the relationship itself. People often assume a narcissist only wants control while you are close to them. But control is not always about possession. Sometimes control is about permanence. They want to believe they left a mark on you that can never be erased. They want to believe that no matter where you go, some part of you still belongs to what they did to you. And when they see that you are becoming stronger, wiser, calmer, and more grounded, they begin to realize something that deeply unsettles them. You are no longer carrying them with you. That realization can create a kind of internal torment they rarely admit, because now they must wrestle with the truth that you were never as weak as they assumed. In fact, the very person they underestimated became the one who did what they themselves could not do. You faced your wounds, you acknowledged your pain, you confronted your darkness, and instead of letting it consume you, you transformed through it. That is something many narcissists cannot understand because transformation requires humility. And humility is the one place their ego refuses to go. They can imitate confidence, but they cannot manufacture inner peace. They can perform strength, but they cannot fake healing forever. They can appear whole, but your growth reveals the cracks in their foundation. And this is why your recovery becomes so powerful. Without saying a word, your life begins to testify against everything they believed about themselves. They may have once convinced themselves that everyone leaves, everyone fails, everyone breaks. But then they look at you and they see someone who was wounded by them and still chose to become better instead of bitter. That kind of transformation creates a reflection they cannot easily dismiss, because your life begins to ask them a silent question. If I could heal from what you did, why can't you heal from what you are? And that question can echo in places they never allow anyone to see. This does not mean they will suddenly repent. It does not mean they will apologize. It does not mean they will openly admit the pain your growth causes them. Many narcissists would rather protect their image than confront their truth. So instead of confessing what they feel, they may criticize you. They may minimize your progress. They may pretend they never cared. They may even try to re-enter your life just to test whether they still have access to the old version of you. But what truly unsettles them is discovering that the person they once manipulated no longer responds the same way. Your boundaries become a mirror. Your peace becomes a mirror. Your confidence becomes a mirror. Your freedom becomes a mirror. And every time they look at you, they are forced to see the contrast between who you became and who they remained. That is why your greatest victory is not revenge. It is not proving them wrong. It is not making them suffer. Your greatest victory is becoming so healed that your existence alone confronts the parts of them they can no longer hide from. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do after betrayal is not to speak at all. Sometimes the loudest message is simply becoming whole again.